ChatGPT, the end of civilization as we know it, the most destructive tool ever invented by humanity. It means that we no longer know what truth is. We no longer know what truth is. We no longer have control of truth. It can infiltrate every single one of our systems. It takes away human knowledge, the value of human knowledge and expertise. If ChatGPT can do it better, why would we spend 20 or 30 years building up human expertise? Dom?
So I'd again somewhat disagree with that. I think something like ChatGPT fundamentally changes the nature of a classroom, for example. And ultimately what it does is it removes the need for us to spend significant amount of times regurgitating information, because that information can be accessed at a pace and can be accessed in a format that is accessible for learners. For me, that opens up a really exciting space where the classroom becomes a space for experiment, for simulation, for challenge, for debate, for building the sets of skills that we know learners need to be able to operate in a highly complex external environment. So for me, that answers two questions actually in the chat as well, is that it shouldn't be something that frightens us. It should be something that actually creates space to allow us as humans to engage in those activities that we know we are best placed to engage with, and remove many of the routinized activity that we currently spend a lot of our working lives undertaking. So that would be my response, David. I'll pass to the others though.
There was a program in the 1970s, and I remember that most of you don't remember that, we're not around, but called Tomorrow's World. And it tried to imagine what tomorrow's world will be like. But I absolutely close, about maybe 11 or 12 years old. And the discussion was, what would we do? This is in the 1970s. What would we do when robots did everything, computers did everything, and we would spend the totality of our life in leisure? How would we manage that? Because we didn't have to do anything. And the other question on the same program was, what did the paperless office look like? Because with computers, you didn't need papers. I'm not quite sure how that worked out.
David, could I, Marta, I wonder, there's a number of questions, and I've been sort of thinking about the sort of pragmatics and the practicalities of using these tools today for the majority of people. Marta, Patrick, I wondered if, there were examples of ways in which they are being used. I know how they're being used in HE, but I wonder in the broader risk management arena, how they are being used.
So in ChatGPT, I'm not aware to be used yet, as it was, like Ruben's mentioned, a very recent platform. But yesterday I decided to try it, so I could bring a practical example, if you allow me, to the table. So I asked the chat if they could provide me with a communication plan and a communication toolkit for earthquake preparedness. I added a word limit of just 100 words to understand what information it would extract with such limitation, and also to avoid receiving a large amount of information. They, in seconds, provide me a step-by-step guide for both scenarios. Most of the information was quite common sense to conduct drills or to prepare pre-scripted messages. However, in the crisis communication toolkit, they proposed some recommendations that I found quite good. The first one was the establishment of a crisis communication hotline. And during COVID, we saw that many countries did not have in place a crisis hotline. And this created a huge overflow of calls to emergency call centers, which delayed response time and jeopardized and put at stake citizens' lives. So at INA, we did a study, and we noticed that countries that had already a crisis hotline before the pandemic had almost the same number of calls to 112 before and during the pandemic. So I found this a very nice tip. The second recommendation, they say, was to encourage people to sign up for emergency alerts and notifications from local authorities, which, as we know, these alerts can provide citizens with information and measures to take protective action. And the last thing, they also proposed communication outreach for vulnerable citizens. And this recommendation, I find it also very good, because many governments invest a lot of money in disaster readiness initiatives, but often they disregard vulnerable populations, like, for example, people with special needs. So from this very preliminary assessment, I think I could say that ChatGPT, it's a very new tool, will need more time. A lot of information that it provides, it's not groundbreaking, of course, but I believe it could have a very important role in supporting crisis communication in the future, and could facilitate the dissemination and outreach of accurate and timely information, could help us counter misinformation, could also generate specific message, could help us create scenarios, crisis scenarios and crisis simulations, and could, I think, generate potential answers for common questions asking a particular hazard. I also wanted to highlight that there is a disclaimer on the limitations of the platform. It says that can occasionally generate incorrect information, that can produce harmful or biased content, and also that there is a limitation of knowledge of world and events after 2021, which is quite reasonable since the platform was invented last year. And also it mentions the capabilities that remembers what users said in early conversation, that allows users to provide follow-up corrections. And I think this is here our ethical and social responsibility on this tool, and also is trained to decline inappropriate requests. So I decided to test this yesterday because I think it could be an interesting practical case study to bring today to the discussion.
Thank you. Patrick, have you integrated it into your own programs?
Yes, well, I just want to build on both the things Dom and Marta just said, because I think they both touched on some very important points. First, I beg to disagree with you again. That's at the beginning, of course, David. Truth died a long time ago. It did not die with ChatGPT. If anything, potentially the tool spreads additional mistruths, but the truth died a long time ago. Having said this, I think we really need to look at ChatGPT, and now we're focusing on this as an accelerator in my mind. It is it adds speed to our thinking, it adds breadth to our thinking, it leads us to consider things that may not be on our radar, may not be in our mindset, and to build on them much faster. And I think this is the incredible element of the platform. What would have requested maybe days of studying and work and analysis is now delivered to you, I wouldn't say instantaneously, but almost. And that allows you to have a starting point on which you can build. And this is interesting in the classroom, where you can, and I fully agree with Dom. I mean, this whole notion of having to put notions into children's and students' brains, when the notions are so broad now, it is virtually impossible. It's just the wrong approach. What we need to do is we need to teach children how to source the information, how to cross-reference the information, how to check it, and then how to build on that, to push the thinking and the reasoning beyond. So speed and breadth, to me, are the key elements. And I also did a little exercise just to bring another concrete example and to support what I was just saying. When the Global Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum took place, the day before they released their usual Global Risk Report 2023. And as I was curious and I had not played with the platform yet, I said, well, let me take this and let me see what ChatGPT tells me about potential systemic crisis scenarios. And I think the interesting thing came, the interesting element that came out of this little research is that whereas people, the experts, the 2,000 baseline of people interviewed to come up with the World Economic Forum report had identified out of 10 risk categories, 6 were in the environmental domain. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. We are like in the middle of a climate crisis. Well, the distribution by ChatGPT was different. And it brought in scenarios that were not part of the risk analysis. So again, it tells you how the machine, let's call it the machine, the system, is able to broaden a little bit your view and give you some additional food for thought. And I think that is what is really interesting. And then when you ask the machine, for example, can you give me potential unconventional systemic crisis scenarios over the next 10 years? What is really interesting in my mind is that the system returns 5 scenarios, and these 5 scenarios are all IT related. And this has to make us think.